43020, this is where we had Brian Powers from from Wellmark, talk to us about Wellmark, Blue Cross Blue Shield, how they're moving things to AWS. We'll come back to this probably in the fall. It'll make more sense as we get a little more knowledge behind us. Okay, Brian's been AWS about 5 years. He started out PL1, Cobalt, web development, and then data warehousing. So he's been doing that 10 to 12 years. Walmart, over 2 million subscribers, 60 to 70% of the market share in Iowa. Originally their IT was risk adverse. There should be 7I, that should be an E, so correct my spelling. And under new leadership, they decided to migrate a multi-year program to move their operations to the cloud. So they set up a cloud framework with regions. We'll learn more about regions in AWS. The AWS has different regions you can belong to when you have services there. Talk about their data centers, availability zones, and so forth. They had to categorize everything in order to put it in place. And Brian talked about they had to update all their versions. Make sure when they moved work from their database out to AWS, that the versions match. They were using, whatever version. Same thing with operating systems and so forth. So it's a big project, moving different parts at different times. The final part will be doing the final move of the data warehouse, and they're moving them to these S3 buckets, forming data lakes, which you can read about or do a little research on. So things we're going to be doing, like in the fall, MySQL, they talked about raw files and reporting from them. That's pretty interesting. We'll touch upon some of that stuff, the type of files they moved, and he dropped some AWS terms. All of these are in that Foundations curriculum. Now we're going to be working on the Foundations curriculum during security, maybe a little during networking. So we want to get through all of that by the June 30th. What were the savings costs, from running their own hosted servers? And Brian talked about the huge amount of data and the huge number of servers and so forth they use to manage. You can imagine an insurance company managing all the claims, all the people, all the individuals, the hospitals, the doctors, and huge amount of data to manage, and then to calculate rates. There's all kinds of software to figure out rates. So there's cost savings, hardware and how you manage it and so forth. Speed to deliver, that was a big one. Being able to get things done faster in the cloud than trying to do it on their own hosted services. Talk about scripting things out. We talked about scripts and how important they are. Brian mentioned it there. He mentioned it here. I know the word scripts is on here like 3 or 4 times. Okay. So talk about that. Patching and security in the cloud. A lot of what they do. Automation, writing scripts to do automation, and then CPU needs. In the AWS curriculum that we're working on and will be working on, there's a whole section on how you can ramp up, increase your CPUs and memory and so forth, and then dial it back down. So you're only paying for what you need. Okay? Challenges? Security is always a challenge, especially in the medical world. He mentioned these virtual private clouds. we also learn about those in the AWS course. It's east and west networking within the cloud. Best practices, new best practices, roles changed, it became more blurred, people designing scripts to do things, authentication and infrastructure, just challenges in making the changes to those. Personal health information, personal identifiable information, key things they need to do. We talked a little bit about if they're doing any other cloud work. Azure, I think I pronounced it, but anyway, they do some services with them. We talked about waterfall. I think we have talked somewhat. You may, if you haven't, you will run that in other classes compared to agile design and creating sprints to get things done. They're moving more to an agile design from waterfall. Waterfall is a very structured form of project management compared to the agile, which is more of a work on something, check, is it working, work on it some more, check, is it working, where here the whole process is designed top to bottom. 200 to 300 people working on the project, and he talked about some of their work, their on-site stuff that people come into managed in a DMZ. So we will, Brian said he communicate with me afterwards, so if you ever want him to do some things like this again, I'm thinking in the fall. In one of the classes, we can relate to a lot of this in all our classes as we work through. We can look at maybe having him come on again and speak to you and to all the students and have a session in the fall. All right, the next thing, Jim Deegan here at NIAC. I think I'm going to use a different color. Let's try green. Actually, probably use black. Okay. At the beginning of this, this is the capstone class. So here we're going to talk about some basics in network. Let me clean that up a little bit. Okay. Some basics. We can talk about network security. Jim Deegan's a network administrator here at the college. And yeah, let's highlight some of the things he talked about. Prior to Jim coming on board this morning, it was actually earlier this morning, we talked about the topology of the network. We said what questions would be interesting. We did a little bit of a diagram over here of the topology up here on the right. And then at 9 o'clock, Jim started. He talked about 30 years experience. And he went right into some of the things they do. Monthly pen testing, an outside group test once a month. We'll do a penetration test to see if there's vulnerabilities. So they have a person externally check it, and then Jim said they fix it. The kind of this, if you try to test your own network and penetrate your own network, you might miss some things, and if you have somebody from the outside. All the training's done by KnowBe4. So like when I get trained to identify phishing, I go through this with them as an employee. Personal identifiable information. They scan for that on all the hard drives that are shared. They're looking for people accidentally leaving Social Security numbers or anything in documents that are on campus. Daily backup. They back up to a local drive, and then it's put out into a cloud service here in Iowa somewhere. They asked about USB management. He said in a lot of businesses they would turn off the USB ports. I think we talked about this in other classes, but here he said so many students use USB to transfer files. They leave that open, creates some risk, but at bare minimum they do scan those. Then I'm going to jump over here. Then Jim went into the Palo Alto. When our connection comes in here from the network, we go over the academic IT area, or it comes into the main campus. And when it comes in the main campus, there's 2 Palo Alto firewalls. We're going to look at Palo Alto firewalls during the security class. So then there's one active and one standby. You know, they mirror each other. So if the active one, if something would happen to the active one, you know, let's say breaks, whatever you want to say, then the standby takes over, and then you fix this one. So they have that redundancy. You set up your networks and your zones. You can set up objects to identify IP addresses, servers, and so forth, and you can take those objects and put them in the groups, so you can do policies based on groups and so forth. You can set up security profiles with those. And Jim went right through the actual firewall and showed us a number of things. I thought it was interesting. You know, he was looking at monitoring outgoing traffic. I don't remember if it was outgoing or incoming and so forth, but he went through and showed the filters, URL blocks, and we talked about wildfire. That'll come up in our classes later on. But it's cloud service that keeps track of things that are going on or suspicious activity. NIAC submits information into wildfire. Okay, so we submit information, we submit in, and we also get out, so you can you're actually monitoring issues around the entire world. Jim did talk about looking at data coming in and out, and a product of Palo Alto is just Global Protect. He didn't go too much in depth in that. He did talk about some of these policies. He showed what things, high-risk things they block, like different regions of the world. They block the IPs from Russia, China, I think North Korea, and so forth, because he said we don't have any students in those countries, and you know, just avoiding certain things or certain problems coming in from those, so we just block them up front. Yeah, we asked about, Jim did mention, have I been pawned? Yeah, that site's been around. You can check to see if your email addresses have been hacked, your passwords. We talked about the number of people that work in the area and everything they have to do. Jim works in the infrastructure area, mostly networking, but handles a lot of the security also. So people asked about WAN and the dorms and so forth. The WAN traffic's on its separate zone in the firewall, which keeps that traffic separate from the other traffic. They use a product called, I believe he said ClearPath, which sets up rules for accessing, you know, the wireless network. And then they have a method of measuring or authenticating people to the wireless. Yeah, that would be interesting. We're going to study more wireless this summer, and maybe we can have Jim talk a little bit about wireless this summer. He did talk about the amount of traffic is so much, you know, the traffic recorded going in and out and going out now is so much less with all the students gone and people not on campus. They have a 1 gig connection to the Iowa Communications Network going in and out. All right. He said there's some features in Office 365 they're looking at for security, ramp up, and so forth. Yeah, we talked a little bit about the VPN traffic too, and he demoed some things there. about some of them split tunnel and some of them don't. So that was good. A student asked a question on that. All right, that was a little long, but I think it's good information, so we have it available later on. So yeah, and if you have any questions on either of these interviews, or you have questions for Jim Deegan or Brian Powers, both of them, easily would agree. I can forward the traffic to them, the emails to them if you have some questions, and they would gladly answer those. All right, well, that is it for today.